summer of 2006, development studio Obsidian Entertainment received a call from Sega. Impressed with Obsidian's work designing story-based role-playing games with a strong emphasis on player choice, Sega expressed its interest in having Obsidian develop a role-playing game based on an original IP for them. Obsidian agreed to the offer, and shortly thereafter, this title, a third-person espionage role-playing game which would become known as Alpha Protocol, would begin development in rigor. Sadly, much of Alpha Protocol's development would be fraught with trouble, with Obsidian's staff unable to define a clear direction for the game and lacking experience designing stealth-based gameplay. However, in the midst of this, Obsidian would receive yet another offer from Sega. This time, the publisher was interested in contracting Obsidian's talents to develop a game based on one of the publisher's more lucrative properties, the Alien franchise. While this game, Alien's Crucible, would ultimately end up being canceled at Sega's behest, what information that has emerged about the game in the years following its demise suggests that Obsidian Entertainment may have had something truly special on their hands. More than just an RPG in an alien mold, Alien's Crucible would have featured a macabre return to the franchise's horror roots, bolstered by Obsidian's expertise in crafting meaningful player choice, making for what could have been an enticing proposition for both fans of Obsidian Entertainment and the Alien franchise alike. In the years prior to Crucible's development, the Alien franchise had become increasingly intertwined with the Predator franchise, taking on a decidedly action-oriented turn in the realm of video games. Between Monolith Productions' Alien vs. Predator 2 in 2001, a first-person shooter that cast players as either a xenomorph, a predator, or a human colonial marine, Zano's Alien vs. Predator Extinction in 2003, which transplanted the aforementioned scenario into the mold of a real-time strategy game, and many other Alien vs. Predator crossover titles, the Alien franchise was becoming increasingly synonymous with bombast and action over horror. With Alien's Crucible, Obsidian aimed to provide an experience that would attempt to blend the franchise's more action-oriented turn with the same sense of dread and emotionality as Ridley Scott's original 1979 film. Crucible would have taken place on the fictional planet of Caldera, a virulent world racked continuously by natural disasters such as earthquakes and electromagnetic storms. The player would have taken on the role of a junior officer on a cargo ship tasked with supplying Caldera's colony with resources by dropping shielded crates from orbit onto the planet's surface. When communications with Caldera's colony are suddenly cut off following the discovery of an engineer spaceport on a remote region of the planet, the protagonist, along with the rest of the ship's crew, are sent to investigate. However, as a result of a system malfunction, the crew is forced to abandon their ship mid-descent using drop pods, resulting in the crew being scattered across Caldera's surface. Alone and without a ship or any other means of immediately evacuating the planet, the player would have to brave Caldera's harsh terrain and reunite with their scattered teammates if they wanted any hope of escaping the planet alive. As is common with Obsidian-developed RPGs, Crucible would have featured a robust character creation suite at the start of the game that would have allowed players to create a protagonist with a unique appearance and set of innate abilities. The player would also have been able to choose from a variety of different technical backgrounds to embody, such as an engineer or military personnel, and would have had access to a comprehensive skill tree that they could level up, allowing them to improve attributes such as the player's toughness or their ability to infiltrate security systems. Every time the campaign was started anew, the player could adopt an entirely different playstyle than their previous cycle. As they explored Caldera's surface, the player would be forced to contend with a host of enemies, both human and extraterrestrial. In addition to fighting Caldera's native lifeforms and xenomorphs that had been gestated in human bodies, Obsidian writer Chris Avallone revealed that, true to their nature, the xenomorphs would have also taken on the planet's indigenous creatures as hosts, inheriting their traits, abilities, and general form. Thus, the player would have had to square off with a plethora of new alien breeds on Caldera, including the Rhino, the Stalker, and the Red Queen, among others. However, in addition to directly fighting these enemies, the player could also avoid confronting adversaries by retreating into their stronghold. A core feature of Crucible, the player would have been given the opportunity to create a base that they could maintain and improve through the use of in-game resources. Over time, the player's ultimate goal of escaping Caldera's clutches would be accelerated by the strength and the amount of survivors brought back to their stronghold. Amidst all of this, the player would have been forced to make difficult decisions concerning their fellow survivors that would both further immerse the player while serving as a grim and constant reminder of their avatar's own mortality. For example, if one of the player's teammates would fall prey to a facehugger, the player would be given the option to mercy kill them, put them in a hyper-sleep capsule and wake them sparingly when in need of their abilities, or leave them to their own fate. If the teammate died, their death would be permanent and would have had grave and long-lasting consequences on the game's storyline. While the player could issue commands to fellow survivors in combat by means of a companion wheel, the loyalty of their squad mates would not be guaranteed. In a 2017 interview with Game Informer, Obsidian writer Eric Fenstermacher revealed that the Avatar's teammates would also be further affected by a morale system. Each of your teammates would be prone to reaching their emotional boiling points when faced with overwhelming odds, and could react to certain stressful situations by firing their weapon erratically or fleeing the scene outright, not dissimilar to the insanity system featured in the game Darkest Dungeon. However, the player's teammates' varying personalities would have also helped give color to the game beyond the blackness of its most stressful depths, providing banter and commentary on the game's various scenarios and locales, and playing off of each other's temperaments.
I just saw movement. What's going on?
Pretty sure it was a bug. It's gone now.
Well, don't get too cocky. Bugs tend to stick around. Just ask Poke if you find her.
Between these innovative gameplay systems and Obsidian's proven track record of making great RPGs, Alien's Crucible could have been one of the most powerful takes on the Alien franchise to grace a video game console. Unfortunately, real-life politics and other factors would prevent it from ever being released to the public. At the time of Crucible's development in 2006, Obsidian Entertainment was working on a number of different projects. Alongside Crucible and Alpha Protocol, Buena Vista, the video game development division of Disney, had also approached Obsidian to work on an RPG set in the world of Disney's Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs, titled Dwarves. Unfortunately, following a shift in direction at Disney, in the wake of Bob Iger succeeding Michael Eisner as Disney's CEO, the world of Disney's Snow White would be pronounced untouchable, and Dwarves would be subsequently canned. The cancellation would prove to be heartbreaking for Obsidian and would follow their subsequent work like a plague. While development of Alien's Crucible started out strongly, with a clear direction and high morale internally for the project's team would end up gradually cutting more and more of the game's content in an effort to get the product out in time and within Sega's allotted budget. As more time passed, Crucible's budget gradually wore thin, and Obsidian would be forced to reach out to the publisher to request more funds for Crucible's continued development on more than one occasion. Meanwhile, Alpha Protocol continued to suffer from the same feeling of aimlessness that had dogged it since the early days of its development. Much like the rest of Obsidian's repertoire up until that point, Alpha Protocol was supposed to be a role-playing game in which the player would have the freedom to explore their environment at their leisure, all the while contending with various threats and making decisions that meaningfully impacted the progression of the narrative. However, early iterations of the project lacked features conducive to this design, such as safe houses or opportunities to freely roam about in the game's cities, while disparate features such as parkour elements, lengthy minigames, and on-rails segments continue to be explored as potential features in their stead. In its current form, Alpha Protocol felt more akin to a shallow action shooter than an open-ended, highly customizable role-playing game. Catching wind of the separate struggles Obsidian was facing with their projects, Sega would step in and freeze Crucible in favor of Alpha Protocol. Obsidian CEO Fergus Urquhart would later recount that the company would provide Sega with a vertical slice of the game on a Friday night in February of 2009, only for Sega to phone the development studio the following Monday to inform them that their Aliens project wasn't to be, despite having not even looked at the prototype that they had been sent. From Fenstermacher's perspective, the decision came about not from Sega being callous or disappointed in Obsidian's work on Crucible, but rather as a result of Sega wishing to be more conservative with their portfolio. With Rebellion Development's Aliens vs. Predator, a sequel to Monolith Productions' Aliens vs. Predator 2, and Gearbox Software's Aliens Colonial Marines, also currently in development at the time, Sega figured it would be best to go with the latter projects, whose straightforward emphasis on Marine versus Alien action appeared much safer bets than Obsidian's more esoteric mixture of action, survival, and RPG. Finally, in June of 2009, both Sega and Obsidian would come forward and publicly announce the official cancellation of Aliens Crucible. After the internal announcement of the game's cancellation, roughly 20 members of Obsidian's development team would reportedly be laid off. Once again, Obsidian was struck with heartbreak. However, unlike Dwarf's cancellation, this one would come with a small, albeit not insignificant, silver lining. In the aftermath of Crucible's canning, Obsidian and Sega would sign a deal that would allow Obsidian to retain the rights to the Onyx engine, which Obsidian had built from the ground up during Crucible's development, with the purpose of supporting the game's vast and open locales. This engine would, in turn, be reused for Obsidian's Dungeon Siege 3 and South Park: The Stick of Truth. In the years that have followed Crucible's demise, a smattering of Obsidian's developers have stepped forward to reminisce on the caliber and level of completion of the ill-fated project. Urquhart would claim in a 2010 interview with Joystick that, quote, "If you had come in and played any of the last builds we were working on, you would have said it was a finished game," further mentioning that it looked and felt like it was ready to ship. Contrary-wise, Avalon would argue in a 2013 interview with Eurogamer this was not the case, and that Urquhart was likely referring exclusively to the vertical slice build of the game that the studio had built for Sega. Avalon would also comment on an impressive-looking 13-minute gameplay demo of Crucible that had found its way to the internet earlier that year, claiming that the leaked footage most likely came from a milestone build of the game months before the aforementioned vertical slice, and was not in any way representative of a finished product. Avalon, however, was otherwise very positive about the project and lamented the fact that Obsidian didn't receive the chance to finish it. According to him, the development team had managed to get quite a lot of preliminary work done before the game was canceled. Its main storyline, breakdowns of all the players' companions' narrative arcs, concept art, and core gameplay mechanics were all ready for use in Crucible's then upcoming stages of development. Obsidian would subsequently go on to complete Alpha Protocol, which, unable to fully escape the phantoms that beguiled its development, would release to poor sales and middling reviews in 2010. Following the project's release, Sega's partnership with Obsidian would come to a close, and with it, the possibility of an Alpha Protocol sequel or a continuation of Obsidian's work on the Alien franchise. In the following years, Obsidian would be brought to the brink of closure, achieving critical acclaim with titles such as South Park: The Stick of Truth and Fallout: New Vegas, but severely struggling financially. Finally, after much deliberation, the studio would agree to launch a Kickstarter campaign for Pillars of Eternity, an old-school spiritual successor to RPGs such as Baldur's Gate, as well as an original property that they would own entirely. Meanwhile, Rebellion Development's Aliens vs. Predator would be released to a positive, if somewhat mixed, critical reception in 2010, while Gearbox's Aliens Colonial Marines would release to an aggressively negative critical reception in 2013, with many members of the media and fans alike lamenting the game's poor artificial intelligence, myriad of bugs, and low-quality graphics. Following the disappointment brought upon by these two action-oriented interpretations of the Alien license, Creative Assembly would return to the franchise's origins with Alien Isolation. A first-person survival horror game, Isolation cast players as Amanda Ripley, the daughter of Alien's Ellen Ripley, contending with a xenomorph infestation aboard the Sevastopol space station, all the while investigating the circumstances of her mother's disappearance. Alien Isolation's return to the series' horror roots, as well as its graphical style, which attempted to emulate the original film's lo-fi 70s vision of the future, was duly appreciated by gamers, and the title successfully managed to reclaim Alien as a video game franchise, following Sega's recent missteps. It is difficult to imagine a scenario in which the vestiges of Aliens Crucible's development are ever resurrected into a finished product. With critically acclaimed, self-owned properties such as Pillars of Eternity and Tyranny at the forefront of Obsidian's current livelihood, it is unlikely that Obsidian still relishes at the thought of working on another publisher's major property, let alone one as steeped in negative memories as Sega's Aliens. However, Isolation's success has proven that the Aliens video game franchise can exist outside of the straightforward bombast of the franchise's Colonial Marines. It can also exist in the dark, gut-wrenching realm of fear, sacrifice, and body horror that Obsidian Entertainment once approached with Aliens Crucible. Our work is made possible by the generous support of our patrons. If you enjoy our content, consider subscribing to our channel and checking us out on Patreon. Thank you.